will the NCAA levy strong penalties against Tennessee? And I'll let you define, Caleb, what those are, and then I'll give you about half a dozen reasons why they won't. What say you?
I say no. I say they will levy some penalties Tennessee doesn't want, but they won't be strong penalties. There'll be some scholarship reductions and maybe, something like that. Recruiting limitations for a little while. I think that's what they'll levy. I don't even think those matter as much anymore when NIL scholarship doesn't matter. Scholarships aren't as big of a deal. And look, you talk about X's and O's versus Jimmy's and Joe's. You said that yesterday. I think Josh Heupel's scheme makes Jimmy's and Joe's just a little less important than it is for Alabama and Georgia.
I agree with that, and I think player development is something that's been overlooked with Josh Heupel. Okay, let me give you some reasons why Tennessee will not face severe sanctions. So if I can, let's go ahead and draw the line in the sand that severe sanctions is a postseason ban. That would be severe, right?
Yes, that would be severe.
You could potentially be out of a playoff. You could be out of the exposure that Tennessee got in the Orange Bowl. That would be severe. Let me tell you why they won't. Doug Dickey back in the day decided he was going to self-report everything. And when he was the athletic director at Tennessee, I don't know, a lot of people don't like Doug Dickey for whatever the reason might be. Basketball is the primary reason. He didn't care about basketball. It was a tenth of the budget. Football was 90%. Just make sure that goes well. So let's go back to the football ticket scandal in 1986. If you don't recall, a lot of the football players were selling their tickets and making quite a bit of money because you got to remember a lot of these games weren't on TV in 86. So Tennessee had 50 players suspended in the first game, New Mexico, and then had some suspended in game 2, which is Mississippi State. Of course, they beat New Mexico. They lost to Mississippi State. That's pretty significant penalties. However, the 50 players that were suspended in game 1, you were going to win that game anyway. As for Mississippi State, I mean, you hate to lose that game, but you only had a handful of players. So that's the most significant that we're going to go through. I feel like after that point, Tennessee was the self-reporting king, absolute self-reporting king. I had somebody that covers another school that told me recently they just ignore it, the school he covers. Tennessee doesn't. They self-report these things. So you had the academic scandal in football in 1999, no severe penalties from that. All of these, when they came out, were every bit as big as the Jeremy Pruitt stuff. You had the phone fraud scandal in 1995, in which they had a phone code. You used to have to dial long distance to call from Knox County to Andersonville, and they were abusing that, and they were giving it to friends, and the code leaked, and that was a big scandal. Again, no significant penalties. T. Martin in 1999. I still believe that T. Martin was paid by a Tennessee booster in part to come to Tennessee, but the argument was made that she knew him before he was actually a prospect his junior year, and that's when he received the money. So it was a very gray area, but that was pretty significant, pretty serious at the time in 99. Bruce Pearl lied to the NCAA and lied to the SEC and UT about Aaron Kraft visiting his home in a non-contact period. Now, that cost Bruce Pearl his job, but did it cost Tennessee all that much? Not really. Donnie Tyndall fired after 1 year for things he had done previously that he had sworn he hadn't done. That was in 2014. Out of all of those, Tennessee only faced severe penalties one time, and that would be the 86 50 players suspended in game 1, some in game 2. That's an ugly look, even if you're going to beat New Mexico. So, and out of all of those, I don't think that you had a clean break like you do with Jeremy Pruitt. So those with a backdrop, Caleb, I think Tennessee has proven through decades that it works with the NCAA. And I think at the end of the day, when the NCAA is deciding postseason ban or not, that they're going to err towards not. They're going to err towards Tennessee's side. Am I right or wrong?
I think you're right. I think the closest, and this wasn't mentioned on there because it wasn't really anything to worry about, but I think the closest Tennessee ever came to trouble with the NCAA, and the only time I think the NCAA created trouble for them as a program was all the investigations into them that were being done after Lane Kiffin's 1 year. And I think that was more, I think that had a lot more to do with Lane Kiffin so publicly thumbing his nose at authority during that time. But he left after 1 year. So had Lane Kiffin stayed, we might be talking a different story, because Lane Kiffin went out of his way to rub the NCAA the wrong way and people the wrong way. I didn't know about that ticket scandal in '86. That explains how they started the year in the top 10 and then went 2-5 at the beginning before winning 5 to finish the season.
I'll never forget that, because remember, Sports Illustrated was basically your sole information. We talked about this yesterday, but on the inside cover, you turned it open and they had a big graphic of Neyland Stadium with a crack down the middle of it and facing NCAA sanctions. And that was a big deal.
Oh my gosh.
That was like being nowadays the lead on SportsCenter for every single story. So Lane Kiffin might have gotten in trouble, but I'll give him credit on this. It was David Reeves, his brother-in-law, quarterbacks coach, who lined up all the guys or all the girls that went to see the guys in the hostess gate situation. And I don't think Lane would necessarily mind me saying this now, but when Jonathan Crompton had his big resurrection in his senior year, I said, I'm just noticing at practice that seems like you're spending more time with Jonathan and David is not. David Reeves. And he said, well, I don't really want that to get out. It makes him look bad. But did David Reeves go to Southern California with him after Hostess Gate? No, he did not. And that was his wife's brother. So I think Lane was smart enough, had he gotten into hot water, that he would have gotten out of hot water. Now, he was pretty cocky back then. You may be right, but I think he was smart enough to know when the difference between towing the line and stepping over the line.
I could see that. And it was weird that he had a quarterbacks coach, because you knew that Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, the one coaching the quarterbacks. That was his forte. I sometimes, honestly, thinking about that now, all the respect in the world for Joey Halsley. Isn't Josh Heupel the quarterbacks coach too? Isn't he the one working with the quarterbacks?
Yes. David Reeves was the hostess coach. He was not really the quarterbacks coach, because I mean, it was as clear as night and day. And people think you see a lot of things at practice as a reporter. You really don't, because you're at field level. There's 3 different practices going on by the time you've got best against scout team and on and on and on. You really don't get that much out of covering an entire practice. But I did notice that in the 2-3 weeks before Jonathan Crompton's resurgence his senior year, that Lane Kiffin was with him a lot more and David Reeves was not. I mean, it was very, very obvious. John says, NCAA said we were a model to be used in self-reporting and taking action. We reduced scholarships and cleaned house. Totally agree. I think Tennessee is the model. Smoky Mountain Red said, I just do not see how it becomes a harsh punishment. To me, a harsh punishment now punishes the wrong people. I could be wrong, but I hope I'm right. I agree with that too. I think Tennessee has that going for it. And they tried to stick with Bruce Pearl because he's a special coach. I mean, he's one of the top 20 or so coaches of his generation. Is that too strong?
At the time, I don't know if he's still in that category, but when he was hired, he was. Again, I think Bruce Pearl, a lot of coaching success is having a system when nobody else runs that system. And I think Bruce Pearl's system, nobody in the SEC was running it at the time. And he just caught everybody by fire.
True. And Pearl was beloved. So there was reason to bend over backwards to try to keep him, despite the fact that he might be fibbing to you and the NCAA. Right. You know, he took off the shirt, he painted his chest, he did all that stuff. He supported the Lady Vols. So they wanted to make that work. But I remember the press conference that he was in when they announced, I believe it was a 6-game suspension, Caleb. It was done at that point because he had already lied so much to the NCAA that once they found out all those were lies, I mean, the die was cast at that press conference, just nobody knew it.
Yeah. I remember when it happened, I didn't know if the die was cast. Wasn't there another scandal that happened in the middle of the season, a smaller one, like something involving Brian Williams and his family, like a week before he was fired? And it was like he was already in hot water, and this broke. And
I don't remember that one.
I think it was something small. I think it was something like maybe Brian Williams like had a few extra tickets for his family for a game or something like that.
But it's like a snooty supermodel. Okay, if you're dating a supermodel and she's snooty, you're going to tolerate it a little bit more. Jeremy Pruitt was snooty in that he broke all kinds of NCAA rules, and he was just a run of the mill coach.
Yeah, exactly.
He was like a Sears plus size model.
I think that made it easier for Tennessee to fire Jeremy Pruitt. I will acknowledge that. The funny thing was the Donnie Tyndall situation you brought up. If you looked at Donnie Tyndall's coaching style, I think he would have won a national championship at Tennessee. Honestly, he was a heck of a basketball coach. He was
a national championship.
Yes, he was. You forget Tennessee had about 3 4-stars committed that 2014 before he had ever coached a game. Donnie Tyndall ran, that Louisville zone defense that no one can ever figure out that Rick Pitino started. Donnie Tyndall mastered that. He mastered it, but he would also press on every made basket. So the defense was so complicated. And then on offense, he ran the high-low motion offense, what Kansas does, and he recruited for it. And I mean, he knew exactly how to get the right players. I'm telling you, I think Donnie Tyndall would have won a national championship at some point at Tennessee, but again, he had 1 year when he went 500. And
well, let me ask you this then: why is he at Chipotle State or whatever?
He's got a show calls. He can't coach in the NCAA.
Yeah,
still a show calls. 10 years.
10 years.
10-year show calls. Yeah.
Would he have played the one and done game? I watched a great documentary recently on John Calipari and how he accepted that. He accepted the one and done game.
John Calipari got out ahead of it before it was even a thing. His second year in Memphis, he had DeJuan Wagner, and he actually pulled DeJuan Wagner's scholarship after his first year to force him to go to the NBA. He was saying, "You're too good, and you got a family to take care of. You need to go pro."
and Wagner ended up getting really sick, and it cut his career short. So it ended up being a great move by him when at the time I don't think anybody knew that, obviously.